ready to dive into a world that, well, kind of impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, impacts all of us.
Today, we're looking at the history and the types and the importance of finance.
That's right.
We're using the Investopedia article, What Does Finance Mean? Its History, Types, and Importance Explained. And I think some people would be surprised to learn just how far back these concepts go.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, did you know that bonds predate paper money?
Mm.
Or that ancient civilizations had their own versions of options contracts? We're going to uncover all that and more.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see how these concepts have evolved over centuries and how they still shape our world today,
Right.
We often think of finance as this modern invention,
Hmm.
but in reality it's been around for a really long time, adapting to different societies and technologies.
Yeah.
But at its core, finance is all about making decisions about money.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is finance?
Finance is essentially the management of money, investments, and other financial instruments. It's really about understanding how the value of money changes over time
Okay.
and making choices that maximize its potential. So you probably heard of the concept of the time value of money, right?
Right.
It means that a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow
Yeah, that makes sense.
because you can invest that dollar today
Yeah.
and it can potentially earn a return.
So it's not just about having money, it's about making that money work for you.
Exactly. It's about putting your money to work. And that concept applies to individuals, it applies to businesses, and even governments.
So the article mentions three main branches of finance: public, corporate, and personal. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. Public finance focuses on how governments manage their revenue and spending. So we're talking about things like taxes, which are, of course, the primary source of funding for government programs and services,
Hmm.
but also includes things like borrowing, issuing bonds to raise capital and managing debt.
Yeah.
And then it gets even more complex when you consider that state and local governments have their own unique revenue streams.
Mm.
They rely on a mix of, federal grants and then additional revenue sources like user fees and fines and licenses.
So public finance is like this giant puzzle with all these different revenue pieces fitting together to fund the services we rely on every day.
Yes, exactly. It's a complex system. And then we have corporate finance. Corporate finance delves into how businesses secure the funding they need to operate and grow.
Okay.
So we're talking about companies taking out loans, lines of credit, seeking equity investments, issuing stocks or bonds, attracting venture capital, all sorts of ways for businesses to get the money they need.
So can you give us some examples of how companies use different financing strategies, like in the real world?
Absolutely. A company like Bausch& Lomb, the eye care company, they went public with an IPO back in 2007.
Mhm.
That means they sold shares of their company to raise capital.
Mm.
And then you have a company like Ford Motor Credit Company, which is a subsidiary of Ford Motor Company, and they specialize in debt management to support the larger company's operations. And then there are companies like HomeLight. It's a real estate company. And they used a combination of equity and debt financing to fund a major acquisition back in 2021.
Hmm.
So each approach, whether it's IPOs or debt financing or a combination, has its own advantages and risks.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to corporate finance?
Nope, not at all. It really depends on the company's goals, their circumstances, their risk tolerance, and a whole lot of other factors.
Right. And then finally, we have personal finance,
Right.
which is all about managing your own money effectively.
Yeah.
So that includes things like budgeting and saving and planning for retirement and choosing the right insurance and making smart investments, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it becomes really relevant for everyone listening, right?
Mm.
We all have financial goals, whether it's buying a home or traveling the world or just achieving a sense of financial security. Understanding personal finance can help people make those dreams a reality.
So now I'm kind of curious about the historical roots of finance. When did people start thinking about these concepts? Did cavemen have personal finance?
Well, maybe not cavemen, but imagine it's 1800 BCE and you're living in ancient Babylon.
Okay.
There's this code, the Code of Hammurabi, which is a set of laws literally carved into a stone pillar. And these laws regulated everything from property ownership to loans and interest rates.
So loans and interest rates have been around for a long time. I guess some things never change, huh?
Yeah, I guess not. But what about money itself? Did they have dollar bills back then?
Did they?
Not quite. Ancient civilizations used a variety of forms of currency. In China, They used cowrie shells by 1200 BCE as a form of currency. And then you have King Croesus of Lydia, who's credited with striking some of the first gold coins around 564 BCE. That's actually where the expression rich as Croesus comes from.
So money has taken many forms throughout history. Speaking of history, when did those more familiar concepts like stocks and bonds come into play?
Well, the earliest stock exchanges actually emerged in the 16th century. Antwerp, Belgium, claims to have the first one that was established in 1531.
Okay.
A little over a century later, in 1606, the East India Company became the first publicly traded company, issuing stock and paying dividends to its investors. And then, of course, you had the establishment of those major stock exchanges, first in London in 1773, and then New York just a few years later in 1792.
It's amazing to think about how these systems have evolved over time, from those ancient codes to global stock exchanges. It's incredible. What about bonds? Did those ancient Babylonians have bonds too?
You might be surprised to learn that the earliest known bond actually dates back even further to 2400 BCE. It was a stone tablet detailing a debt obligation in Sumer,
Wow.
and it guaranteed the repayment of grain. And, fast forward a bit, government started issuing bonds to finance wars. The Bank of England was created in the 1600s to fund the British Navy, and the United States issued its first treasury bonds in 1790 to help support the Revolutionary War.
So bonds have been around for millennia, from grain repayments in Sumer to financing wars and supporting governments today. But what about those more complex financial instruments we hear about, like options contracts? Those seem like a modern invention.
Well, you might be surprised to learn that options contracts have ancient roots too. Aristotle tells this story about Thales, a Greek philosopher who secured the rights to all the olive presses in a certain region
Okay.
because he anticipated a bumper harvest. And by acquiring those rights in advance, he was able to profit handsomely when the harvest came in.
Wow. So the ancient Greeks were already thinking about options trading. Finance has always been a mix of strategy and prediction and risk taking, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's always been about managing risk and trying to anticipate the future. And of course, we can't forget about the role of accounting in managing finances. Remember the time value of money we talked about earlier?
Yes.
Well, ancient civilizations actually knew about compound interest. But it wasn't until the Middle Ages that mathematicians really started analyzing its power in depth. Leonardo Fibonacci, the Italian mathematician famous for the Fibonacci sequence, he wrote about compound interest in the 13th century. His work helped people understand how quickly investments can grow with this power of compounding.
Fibonacci, the compound interest guy, who
Hmm.
knew? So what happened after Fibonacci? What happened next in the accounting world?
Well, in 1494, Luca Pacioli, an Italian mathematician and Franciscan friar, he published this really groundbreaking treatise on bookkeeping and accounting in Venice. And this work, it helped standardize accounting practices, and it really laid the groundwork for modern accounting.
A book on accounting by a Franciscan friar. Now, that's not something you see every day. So Pacioli lays the groundwork in the 15th century. Where do we go from there?
Well, by the early 17th century, you see compound interest gaining wider acceptance. Tables of compound interest are published in English. And by the end of the 17th century, you see another kind of major development. This combination of interest calculations with age-dependent survival rates, which led to the creation of the first life annuities in England and the Netherlands.
So life annuities, now we're talking about the foundation of modern insurance, right?
Exactly.
It's amazing to see how all these pieces came together.
It is, isn't it?
From interest calculations to those mortality tables to financial contracts. It's like a puzzle
Yeah.
where each piece kind of builds on the one before it.
Exactly. Each innovation builds on the last, creating this complex and interconnected system that shapes our world.
So we've journeyed from those ancient codes and cowrie shells to the birth of stock exchanges, the evolution of bonds, the origins of options contracts and life annuities. It's clear that finance has really deep roots, and its evolution has been shaped by wars and by technological advancements and just the brilliant minds of those philosophers and mathematicians over time. It's just amazing to see how it's all connected.
Yeah, it really is. And it's a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability.
Yeah.
Finance is constantly evolving, responding to these new challenges and opportunities, and there's still so much more to explore, especially when it comes to those different types of finance that exist today.
That's right. We've touched on the three main branches, the public, the corporate, and the personal. But The article mentions some other intriguing categories like social finance and behavioral finance. I'd love to dig into those a bit more.
Absolutely. Those are fascinating areas to explore. Social finance, for example, focuses on investments that aim to generate both financial returns and positive social impact.
So what would be some examples of social finance in action?
Well, imagine investing in companies that are developing renewable energy solutions or organizations working to improve access to education in underserved communities.
Mm.
Or think about microfinance,
Hmm.
which provides those small loans to entrepreneurs in developing countries. You know, these are just a few ways that social finance is trying to make a difference in the world while also generating a financial return.
I love that concept. It's like proving that you can do well while also doing good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's about aligning your financial goals with your values.
Now, what about behavioral finance? That sounds really intriguing.
Yeah. Behavioral finance, it delves into the psychology behind those financial decisions.
Okay.
It acknowledges that people don't always act rationally with money. You know,
Hmm.
our emotions and our biases and those social influences can have a big impact on our choices.
Well, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
I've definitely made some impulse purchases that I've later regretted. So what are some of the key concepts in behavioral finance that can help us understand these irrational tendencies?
Well, one key concept is this idea of mental accounting,
Okay.
which describes how we tend to categorize money for different purposes,
Right.
even though it's all fungible, right?
Right.
So, for example, someone might be diligently saving for a vacation, but at the same time, they might be carrying a large balance on their high-interest credit card.
Ah, that's so interesting. It's like we create these mental silos for our money, which can lead to some less than optimal decisions.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not always logical, but it's how our brains tend to work.
Are there any other behavioral quirks we should be aware of?
Absolutely. Another really important concept is herd behavior.
Okay.
And this is the tendency to follow the crowd, even when it comes to financial decisions.
Mhm.
Think about stock market bubbles and crashes. Those are often fueled by herd behavior.
Mm.
As investors pile into or out of investments based on what everyone else is doing, regardless of their own analysis or their own risk tolerance.
It's like that fear of missing out, right? The FOMO
Exactly.
that we see so much these days. Are there any other behavioral biases that we should be on the lookout for?
Oh, there were plenty. Another one is anchoring, which refers to our tendency to rely on irrelevant reference points when making decisions.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. A classic example is that 2-month salary guideline for engagement rings.
Okay.
There's no logical reason why that should be the benchmark, but it's become so ingrained in our culture that it influences how much people feel they should spend.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. It's amazing how these subtle psychological factors can really shape our spending habits without us even realizing it.
Yeah. And that's really the power of behavioral finance, right? It helps us to recognize those subconscious forces that can sometimes sabotage our financial well-being.
Right.
By understanding these biases, we can hopefully become more aware of them and make more informed choices.
So now I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, the relationship between finance and economics. You said they're like two sides of the same coin. They're distinct disciplines, right?
They are. Think of it this way. Economics is the study of how people make decisions in the face of scarcity.
Okay.
It looks at how resources are allocated, how markets function, how economic policies impact society as a whole.
So it's like the big picture view of how economies work.
Exactly. Finance, on the other hand, is more focused on that management of money and financial instruments within that larger economic context. It's about making those decisions, about investing and financing and risk management.
So it's like applying the principles of economics to the world of money and investments.
That's a great way to put it. For example, an economist might study the causes of inflation, while a financial advisor might help their clients protect their investments from those negative effects of inflation.
That's a helpful distinction. It seems like both fields are really essential for understanding how money works and how it impacts our lives.
Absolutely. And they often intersect,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to those financial markets.
Hmm.
Economists develop models to try to understand how those markets work, while those finance professionals use those models to try and make investment decisions.
So it's like a collaborative effort with both fields contributing to our understanding of finance.
Exactly. And that's what makes finance so fascinating. It's constantly evolving. It draws on insights from economics, from psychology, from mathematics, even from history.
So is finance an art or a science?
That's a great question. And the article actually presents a compelling case for both sides. On the one hand, finance has these deep roots in scientific fields like statistics and mathematics,
Right.
and many modern financial theories, they're expressed in those mathematical formulas. And financial analysis relies heavily on those statistical methods. But on the other hand, we can't ignore the human element, right?
Right.
Emotions and unpredictable events and even just gut feelings can have a huge impact on those financial markets. Think about market crashes,
Yeah.
like the one in 1987 when the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged 22% in a single day.
Wow.
Those events are difficult to explain purely through those rational scientific models. You know,
Mm.
there are often psychological and social factors at play that just defy easy prediction.
So it's like finance is this blend of both, a delicate dance between those scientific principles and human behavior.
Yeah, I like that analogy. A delicate dance.
Mm.
And that's what makes it such a fascinating and dynamic field. It's constantly evolving. It's always challenging our assumptions, forcing us to adapt and learn.
Well, you've certainly given me a lot to think about. This deep dive into finance has been a whirlwind of information, from those ancient practices to those complexities of those modern markets.
It's been a journey. But for now, we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll delve a bit deeper into some of those more nuanced aspects of finance, and I'll leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
Sounds good to me. Looking forward to the next leg of our journey. Welcome back. I'm ready to dive deeper into the specialized areas of finance we touched on earlier.
hmm
The social finance, the behavioral finance, they both sound really fascinating and a little mysterious, to be honest.
Yeah, there are definitely areas where we see that human element of finance really come into play. Let's start with social finance. Remember, it's about aligning financial goals with positive social impact.
Yeah, we talked about, investments in things like renewable energy and education and microfinance, but you mentioned something called social impact bonds.
Right.
And I'm curious to learn more about how those work. They sound like a really innovative approach.
They are. Social impact bonds are sometimes called pay-for-success bonds,
Okay.
and they're designed to address those social challenges while also generating a financial return for investors. So it works like this. Private investors, they provide the funding for a specific social program, and the government, they only repay the investors if that program achieves these predetermined outcomes.
So it's like a performance-based contract.
Yeah, exactly.
If the program succeeds in, say, reducing homelessness or improving educational outcomes,
Right.
then the investors get their money back plus a return. But if it doesn't meet those goals, the investors, they bear the risk.
Exactly. It's a way to incentivize innovation and effectiveness in the social sector. Governments, they get to try out those new approaches without taking on all the financial risk.
Mhm.
And investors, they get the opportunity to support those programs that align with their values.
I really like that. It's a really clever way to mobilize private capital for social good. I'm impressed. Now, let's shift gears to behavioral finance. Earlier, we touched on some key concepts like mental accounting, herd behavior, and anchoring. But I'm curious to learn more about how this field of study came about. Was it a sudden revolution or did it emerge more gradually?
It's a fascinating story of how finance really had to acknowledge the role of human psychology. For a long time, those traditional financial theories assumed that people always acted rationally and predictably with their money.
So kind of like those perfectly rational beings we see in economics textbooks.
Exactly. But as you might imagine, real-world behavior is a lot messier than those models suggest. People, they make decisions based on emotions and biases and social influences, sometimes even when it goes against their own best interests.
So academics and researchers, they started noticing these patterns and realized that something was missing from those traditional models.
Exactly. And that's where behavioral finance stepped in. It draws on insights from psychology to understand how our minds work and how those mental processes can really influence those financial choices.
That makes sense. It's like acknowledging that we're not always these cold, calculating machines when it comes to money.
Yeah.
We have hopes and fears and we make mistakes and sometimes we just get swept up in the excitement of the moment.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that human element in finance.
Mm-hmm.
So who are some of the key figures in this field?
Yeah.
The pioneers who really paved the way for behavioral finance?
You're the expert. Enlighten us.
Well, two names that immediately come to mind are Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
Oh,
They
yeah.
started collaborating back in the late 1960s, and they're considered by many to be the fathers of behavioral finance. You know, their research really challenged those traditional assumptions of rationality and highlighted the power of cognitive biases in shaping our judgments and decisions, especially in that realm of finance.
Didn't Kahneman win a Nobel Prize for his work?
He did. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for integrating insights from psychological research into economic science, particularly in those areas of judgment and decision-making under uncertainty.
It really highlights how groundbreaking their work was, right?
Yeah, it was really revolutionary.
Bridging those two fields that had previously been seen as quite separate. So what about other key figures in this field? Anyone else we should be aware of?
Another very influential figure is Richard Thaler. He joined Kahneman and Tversky in their research and further developed that field of behavioral finance. You know, he combined economic and financial theory with elements of psychology to develop those concepts that we were discussing earlier,
Right.
like mental accounting and the endowment effect and all those biases that can impact our behavior with money.
You mentioned the endowment effect, but can
Mm.
you remind me what that one is? It sounds familiar, but I can't quite recall what it means.
It's the tendency to overvalue something simply because we own it.
Mhm.
So, for example, you might find yourself holding on to a stock that's not performing well, simply because you're attached to it and don't want to sell at a loss. Or you might overprice an item that you're selling online because you've developed this sentimental attachment to it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We really do develop these emotional attachments to our possessions, and that can really cloud our judgment,
Exactly.
especially when it comes to money.
Yeah, and that's one of the key takeaways from behavioral finance. It helps us recognize those subconscious forces that can sometimes sabotage our financial well-being.
Hmm.
By understanding those biases, we can hopefully become more aware of them and make more informed choices.
That's great advice. Now, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, the relationship between finance and economics.
Yeah.
You said they're like two sides of the same coin,
Mm-hmm.
but they are distinct disciplines, right?
They are. Think of it this way. Economics. It's the study of how people make decisions in the face of scarcity.
Okay.
It looks at how resources are allocated, how markets function, how economic policies impact society as a whole.
So it's like the big picture view of how economies work.
Exactly. Finance, on the other hand, it's more focused on the management of money and financial instruments within that larger economic context. It's about making those decisions about investing, financing, and risk management.
So it's like applying those principles of economics to the world of money and investments.
That's a great way to put it. For example, an economist might study the causes of inflation,
Okay.
while a financial advisor might help their clients protect their investments from those negative effects of inflation.
That's a really helpful distinction. It seems like both fields are really essential for understanding how money works and how it impacts our lives.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
they often intersect, especially when it comes to those financial markets.
Yeah.
You know, economists develop models to try to understand how those markets work, while those finance professionals, they use those models to make those investment decisions.
So it's like a collaborative effort with both fields contributing to our understanding of finance.
Exactly. And that's what makes finance so fascinating. It's a constantly evolving field that draws on those insights from economics, from psychology, from mathematics, even from history.
You've given us a lot to think about. This deep dive has been an amazing journey so far, exploring the history, the types, the psychology of finance.
And we're not done yet.
Yeah.
But for now, let's take a short break. When we return, we'll wrap things up with some final thoughts and a provocative question to leave you pondering.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of finance. I'm ready to hear your concluding thoughts and that thought-provoking question you promised.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've explored everything from ancient Babylonian contracts to the psychology of investing.
Yeah.
What stands out to you from everything we've discussed? What has resonated with you the most?
Honestly, it's the sheer scope of finance that's most impressive. We've seen how it's woven into the fabric of history and culture and even our own minds. It's not just about numbers and markets, it's about people and decisions and the systems we create to manage money and resources.
That's a great observation. Finance is indeed a reflection of human ingenuity and our evolving relationship with money.
Hmm.
And as we navigate the 21st century with all its technological advancements and global interconnectedness, understanding finance becomes even more crucial.
You're right. With the rise of things like fintech and cryptocurrencies and the increasing complexity of those global markets, it feels like we're entering a whole new era of finance. It's both exciting and a little daunting at the same time.
It certainly is a time of rapid transformation. And that brings me to the thought-provoking question I wanted to leave you with today. Given the long history of finance and its constant evolution, what do you think the future holds for how we manage money and investments?
Wow, that's a big question. It's hard to predict with certainty, but I think technology will continue to play a major role. Maybe we'll see even more decentralized and personalized financial systems. Perhaps the rise of AI-powered financial advisors that can tailor advice to individual needs and goals. Or maybe blockchain technology will create those new opportunities for peer-to-peer lending and investing, empower individuals in ways we haven't even imagined yet.
Those are some fascinating possibilities, and it highlights the importance of staying informed and adaptable as the financial landscape continues to evolve. The key takeaway from this deep dive is that finance is not a static field. It's a dynamic process that reflects our changing needs and values and aspirations.
That's a great point. This deep dive has definitely equipped me with a better understanding of not just the past and present of finance, but also its potential future. It's inspired me to stay curious, keep learning, and approach my own financial decisions with a more informed and critical eye.
That's fantastic to hear. Remember, knowledge is power, especially in the world of finance. The more you understand about the principles and the history and the human element, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the complexities of money and investments. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one driving that next wave of innovation in finance.
That's a great thought. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the world of finance. We hope you've enjoyed the deep dive and gained some valuable insights along the way. We'll be back soon with a new topic and a fresh perspective. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those thought-provoking questions.